One moment.
Oh, Pete's not ready, sorry, so I'll start all over.
Okay, go.
Okay, we're calling the August 27th meeting of the Oregon City Planning Commission to order. And everyone is here. So we have on our agenda tonight, just so you know, we will be continuing the public hearing. There will be no decision tonight. We just got this.
It was good reading.
It's good reading, yeah. They've already read it. They're really good.
Let me go through that.
Okay, I'm gonna rely on you 100%, Bob.
Okay. Well, 99.
So we have, item number 2 is we have public comments for items that are not currently on the Planning Commission agenda, nor will we be talking about those items because it's not on the agenda. So I have Tom Guile.
Okay, Tom Guile, resident of Oregon City. We have an election coming up, and this is not on the subject of what's on the Planning Commission, but it's a public service announcement to all the citizens that are watching as well as those that are in the audience. Willamette Falls Cable and I are partnering to do a series of interviews with all the candidates running for commission and mayor. And we'd like to ask any of the citizens that are here, whether it's about Planning Commission questions, about code amendments, anything that you have in mind about what you'd like to know from candidates for commissioner or mayor, we'd like you to submit them because we want to ask the same questions of every single one. We don't want it looking like we're asking only this person this question and that person that question. We want to be neutral with everyone asking ask the same questions. Each interview will be about a half hour and it'll be broadcast on local cable television so individuals in our city can get to know what the people, who they are and what they represent. If you'd like to submit those questions, there is a group page that we open up called Oregon City Raw, and it has to do with, these are just raw about politics and what's happening in the city. And again, it's a Facebook page, a group page called Oregon City Raw. Or you can send them to Melody at the Willamette Falls Television, or cable, excuse me. So again, this will be happening in early September. And if you're interested in asking some of the candidates questions, we'll be glad to ask them for you. But again, they'll be asked of all candidates. Thank you.
Is there anybody else here this evening that would like to make a comment about something that is not currently on the Planning Commission agenda? If you would like to, please feel free to come up and we'll be interested in hearing what you have to say.
Did you, Paul Edgar Kanema, Oregon City, did you get a response back from John Lewis or through Laura on that
Topic from
fence
last
question?
month?
We do not have a response yet.
Can we expect that in a timely manner, maybe by the next Planning Commission meeting?
I'll ask John.
Okay, be perfect. John, if you're watching at home,
You're on notice.
we have a question for you. All right, anybody else? Okay, all right, so on tonight's agenda, we have a public hearing. It is listed as, oh, and by the way, if you have, I just turned mine off, so if your cell phone is on or your computer or anything else, it'd be much, much appreciated if it didn't ring, and I'll try to make sure mine doesn't either. So tonight on our agenda, we have a legislative item, LEG 1840's number 1, Development Code Amendments including equitable housing. This public hearing was continued from August 13th and more than likely will be continued again tonight. As you can see, we have as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot to read. And I'll ask you a couple of questions about this under communications, Pete, just to make sure I know which pages are new or which are old, or how does that compare to all the stuff I already have.
Okay.
So we are going to be using the timer tonight, and you will have, since we're going to probably continue this, you will have another opportunity to speak. We're not going to try to in any way squash what you have to say. Just want to make sure people are aware that this is a legislative hearing. We're not subject to the 120-day rule, but we would hope that anyone who wishes to speak has already filled out a speaker's card Actually, it's not a card or paper. If you decide you want to talk and you didn't fill one out, don't worry, you can come up and fill it out after you speak. We would appreciate you filling out the paper with your name and your address so we can notify you of any future meetings, upcoming issues that regard the topic you're here. And for the public record, please begin all testimony by stating your name. You don't actually have to tell us where you live, just if you live in a certain town, that's fine. And we would hope that your testimony will be directed towards the specific topics that we are covering tonight under the Legislative Code Amendment. And if you want to submit something in writing, feel free. The public record is still open. If you want to present anything that's bigger than a piece of paper, just make sure that you have copies for the staff. And in the future, if you want to do a PowerPoint or anything of that sort with poster boards, reports, pictures, or other exhibits to be placed in the record, be sure to make sure that staff has that so they can be included as part of the public record and will be listed as such, because the City Commission is going to get to do this all over again. Yeah, I'm sure they can't wait to get their packet. Maybe we could just give them our packets with all of our notes on them. That might be helpful.
I'm thinking about a sailplane contest.
Sailplane content, I think I'll just hand mine over to a commissioner with all my notes on it. That might help them. So, we don't really have any sites and we don't really have any ex parte contacts to declare regarding this. I don't think anybody has come up and tried to lobby us about any of the legislative amendments. Has anybody tried to lobby any of you guys about these legislative amendments? No, nobody's, so a couple of you have talked to me, but they were very specific, not about the general code. So we will start with, do you have a very brief intro?
I will keep it brief.
Okay, all right, thank you. Please proceed.
So, legislative file 18001 consists of code amendments to implement certain comprehensive plan goals and policies, and also city commission goals and priorities, as well as to simplify our code. And we have been working for a year and a half with the Equitable Housing Project Advisory Team to implement a majority of these recommendations. So this slide illustrates where the direction is coming from as far as why we're proposing this. We have several city commission goals that deal with why it's important to simplify the development review code, as well as to make sure that we understand any barriers in our development review codes that might be inhibiting the provision of additional housing opportunities in the city. Bearing in mind that this is a huge problem with a lot of causes. So it includes equitable housing code amendments, which are defined as opportunities to support and incentivize diverse, quality, physically accessible, and affordable housing throughout the city, and providing opportunities for all of our residents to buy or rent in areas that are accessible to a variety of needs, such as transit, school, childcare, food, and parks. Along with this, we are doing some code amendments that include reformatting, process refinements, and other cleanups. The missing middle is what we refer to as the Equitable Housing Code. It is a way of providing additional housing unit types beyond the traditional detached single-family home and the apartment. This includes duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, multiplexes, live work, and a variety of other things. The code amendment process is defined in Chapter 1768 of our code. This is a text amendment to the zoning code. It is a legislative request from the Planning Division at the direction of the City Commission, and the application is signed by the city manager. The Equitable Housing Project was driven by a project advisory team. We had a project website. We did 3 online surveys. This is meeting or opportunity number 36 of approximately 45 meetings, including Planning Commission and City Commission meetings to address this issue. We've
provided what's called a Measure 56 notice, which are those green postcards, which some of you may have seen in your mailboxes. Those were sent out to every property owner. Notice in the newspaper, we have a mailing list, which people signed up for with about 250 people. And we provided regular notices to the Citizen Involvement Committee and neighborhood associations. Our project advisory team is a broad group of stakeholders made up of the groups you see here. Citizen Involvement Committee, single-family developers, multifamily developers, business community. We have 3 at-large people representing the youth, elderly, and working families of Oregon City, a member of our technical advisory team, a developer of regulated affordable housing, an organization representing low-income families and communities of color, and we had several other positions that were filled at large. And a member of the Planning Commission, Denise Thinks, and City Commission, Nancy I. Thank you. All of our project advisory team are Oregon City residents, and those project advisory team members signed the recommendation to move forward with the code proposals that are before you at their meeting on June 21st, 2018.
Madam Chairman, I got a point of information, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
There's some signatures missing from this.
Yeah.
Is there any reason why?
Those people, there was no compulsion to sign this. The idea behind asking people on the project advisory team to sign that was if they felt supportive of the issues and/or they felt that the meeting on June 21st, 2018 accurately represented the consensus of the committee, and where dissenting points of view were heard, they were written into those recommendations. So that was what that was about. Zone change criteria include these 4 things. The proposal must meet the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. We've got to be able to provide public facilities and services, and that includes everything from sewer pipes, et cetera, police, fire, emergency services, schools. Must be available to serve any change that might come as a result of these zoning code amendments. The code amendments must be consistent with the planned capacity of our transportation system. And we have a report from John Replinger, who's to my left, that addresses how this complies with the transportation system plan and the statewide transportation planning rule and the assumptions and analysis that we did to do that. And criterion D, statewide planning goals must be addressed if the comprehensive plan doesn't contain specific policies or provisions which control the amendment. In all cases, the city's comprehensive plan does implement the statewide planning goals, so criterion D is met. And I'll go through. This chart illustrates what the statewide planning goals are. There are 19 of them. And on the right side are the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan sections and goals that pertain to those statewide planning goals. So all of those goals are implemented, and the policies that pertain to them are addressed in the staff report. With respect to statewide goals 3 and 4, those are generally not applicable within the urban growth boundary of Oregon City because they deal with ag land, and we don't have any designated agricultural land in the city urban growth boundary. Neither do we have any designated forest land in the city urban growth boundary. The Willamette River Greenway, Goal 15, is not affected by this proposal, and Goals 16 through 19 are not applicable to Oregon City. And I'm not going to go into all these goals and policies unless you want me to. Otherwise, I was going to skip right to the end. So I did want to talk about citizen involvement because that's the very first goal. And we have multiple goals and policies that address this. We need to implement our citizen involvement program through our Citizen Involvement Committee and neighborhood associations. We've done that. We've assured that all of our citizens and property owners are involved in all of the phases of this program. There's been multiple platforms to participate in this project. And we had a project advisory team, which was our principal structure for guiding this process. And these are all of the goals and policies that are addressed in the staff report, right up to goal 14, urbanization. I do think it's very important that you take a look at the staff report for each of these goals and policies and look at what I've written and what Laura has written in terms of responses to those goals and policies and how we feel that this project meets them. We do. And this chart here illustrates the many meetings and opportunities for input we've had on this project.
Pete, just for the record,
Yeah.
the staff report is online and available for anybody.
That's correct. The staff report is online. It's called Recommended Findings. As Denise mentioned, we're not asking for a decision tonight. We've got a lot more ground to cover. Principally, what I'd like to do tonight is discuss briefly with John Replinger's help, the transportation analysis that was done and introduce the Wallace Engineering report. I'd also like to introduce into the record two new exhibits that were given to us today. One is a letter from PGE, Portland General Electric, on our public tree code. Portland General Electric is advocating for the ability to remove certain types of trees without having to do a tree removal permit. And they're talking specifically about types of trees that they encounter in work that are either nuisances or volunteer species that aren't formally planted. This is a subject of debate, and they talk about, because PGE is our utility franchise and has the authority to maintain a clear area around power lines in the city, that is why they're asking for this provision.
Can we just postpone discussing this
Yeah,
particular?
we can discuss that later.
Later, thank you.
Yeah. So,
And the second item?
second item is, thank you, Wallace Engineering's memorandum. In your packet, it's a draft. This memorandum is more finalized. It's been reviewed by the city engineer, Alita Froman Goodrich, and by John Lewis, our Public Works Director, and incorporates some additional clarifications about what the city's capacity is and some of the analysis that has been done with respect to the sewer system. So what the report does, this report is based off the transportation analysis that was done by John Replinger. So it provides a separate overview of the potential for an assumption of additional units that we made based on looking at the proposed code amendments and looking at making some assumptions about what might happen with additional units and comparing that to the transportation system plan estimate of approximately 7,963 additional housing units through the year 2035. And because that number represents additional housing units that are deemed to be in compliance with our transportation system plan and built into our improvements for our transportation program and our system development charges, we're using that as a baseline for estimating how many additional units above and beyond what is already permitted in the zoning code might be built. It's
So-
not an exact estimate, but it's, yeah. Go ahead.
So in other words, we planned for 8,000 units, just as a round
Plan for
number.
8,000
And-
units and, yeah.
And the engineering study, and I assume what John would say is, if we built those 8,000 units, but we got the 20% bump for affordable housing, and we had X amount of ADUs, or replaced a single-family dwelling with a fourplex, what level of expansion we can handle before it becomes an issue?
In essence, that's what we're trying to do. You know, this is a very, very difficult thing to estimate what the impact of this might be, because there's so many unknowns. Yes, we can change the zoning code to allow certain types of permitted uses, but we can't predict whether or not a property owner is going to take advantage of that, given their personal circumstances. So,
Well, I think in light of the fact that we have some constrained systems around our city, I think that we probably need to have a little more, we
Yeah.
just got this today, so
Yeah,
we're not
right.
going to talk about it, but
and I'd like to give John a little time just to give a brief overview of his report, because then we can focus in on that.
yeah, but I mean, we have sewer capacity issues in our community.
Right.
And there's only so much, I know it all goes downhill, but there's only so much that's gonna be able to go downhill.
Right. So the conclusion that Wallace Engineering made, I'll get to later, but if John, you'd like to lead off?
Okay, thank you, Chairman Griff and Commissioners.
Actually, you wanna just wrap up the sewer stuff and then we'll talk transportation stuff?
I can do that.
Yeah, just, let's take another minute.
Sure. So, 160 additional units beyond the planning projections is deemed not to have an adverse impact on the 2035 sanitary sewer flows from the sanitary sewer master plan, or the 2030 water demand predicted in the 2012 water distribution plan. In addition to that, South Fork Water Board has provided a memorandum that says that they have sufficient capacity to serve those additional units. And the Tri-City Sewer District has entered a letter saying they have a capacity at the plant to treat that additional flow. There's some more detailed language with respect to the assumptions that were made and what might have to happen if the growth rate of the city is faster than the assumptions made in those master plans for sewer and water and that sort of thing. And they would, if that were to occur, then the capacity issues identified under the future flow model would occur sooner than anticipated, and then we'd have to prioritize our capital improvement programs differently.
So
Yeah.
does the information from South Fork include projections from our partner that's an owner in South Fork with us?
No, it doesn't. It's just based on the 160 units that we based the other analyses on, coming from the general manager.
Can you stick that as a question for later?
Sure.
We
yeah,
also are not the only people who are using Tri-Cities.
That's true, yeah.
So
Okay.
there are other communities that are going to have capacity opportunities or capacity issues as well. And since we all own this together, it seems to me we'd be looking at cumulative rather than just the little box that Oregon
carved
City
out for city. Yeah.
fits in.
Yeah, that's a good
At
question.
least we're trying to think comprehensively.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, so those are 3 questions for later.
Thanks.
All right, John.
Okay, thank you, Commissioners. As you're aware, whenever there's a change proposed to the comprehensive plan or the zoning code, we're obligated to assess the impact, transportation planning rule compliance. I think even if it weren't for that requirement from the state, we as staff would expect that we need to provide the information to you as the Planning Commission and to the City Commission because of the importance of accounting for and accommodating the projected transportation impact over the 20-year period. As a couple of you have mentioned, the expectation is for an additional 8,000 dwelling units between 2010 and 2035. That's what we plan for in the transportation plan, in the transportation system plan. In terms of evaluating the effect of the equitable housing program, as Pete mentioned, a lot of the information, a lot of the changes that are made are some cleanup, in part to make things easier for staff to evaluate the various criteria. In looking through the complete text of the proposed amendments to support equitable housing, I came to focus on 4 different areas where I thought there was some potential for an increase in transportation demand, at least something that required a more detailed analysis. The first of those has to do with duplexes. Duplexes currently account for less than 2% of the housing opportunities in Oregon City. Information provided in terms of looking at national statistics from the Bureau of Census and Housing and Urban Development, it appears that duplexes are typically only running around 3% of the new housing starts. But to focus in on a reasonable worst-case analysis for the transportation impacts from duplexes, we essentially said, what if the percentage of duplexes doubles from the current 2% to 4%? What if out of that next 8,000 dwelling units, 4% of them are duplexes? So 320 duplexes, taking the place of 160 single-family dwellings, which we would have otherwise expected in the R6, 8, and 10 zones in particular. And furthermore, we said that to do a reasonable worst-case analysis, let's just assume that these duplexes are above and beyond the 8,000 dwelling units we expect between 2010 and 2035. Now, it might be, one could argue that, well, they're just going to substitute for single-family homes, but we said, in a worst case, we're going to add 160 more duplexes than we would have otherwise expected. They're going to be new housing units above and beyond the 8,000. The effect of adding that 160 more dwelling units is adding less than 0.75% to the transportation demand. And furthermore, we expect those duplexes to be scattered out over the entire city. Some of them will be developed in new subdivisions. Some of them will be conversions in older parts of town, conversions of existing dwelling units. Some will be squeezed in when certain lots in older parts of town are redeveloped. So the effect that I calculated for the change that allows more duplexes is very, very small, because it'll be scattered over the entire area. The second thing that I evaluated was the impact as proposed in the new zoning code. Townhouses would be allowed to be created on smaller lots in the R5 zone than single-family dwellings. Instead of a single-family dwelling on 5,000 square feet, a townhome would be permitted on a 3,500 square foot lot. You can see that would increase the number of units. However, we also know from the statistics from the Institute of Transportation Engineers that the condominium townhouses produce fewer trips than do single-family residences. So one of the tables that I have presented in my memo shows the effect. If we had 10 acres that were developed as townhomes in place of single-family residences, the effect is really minimal. The prediction would be slightly more daily trips, but fewer AM peak hour trips and fewer PM peak hour trips than the equivalent 10 acres developed as single-family homes. So no effect on the transportation system from that proposal. The other proposal that I focused on was the proposal to allow townhouses on 2,500 square foot lots in the R3.5 zone instead of the single-family residences on the 3,500 square foot lot. And again, this has similar effect because the townhomes produce fewer trips. They tend to be smaller number of bedrooms, tend to have smaller family size, therefore they produce fewer trips. So again, the effect is a slight increase in daily trips, but fewer AM peak hour trips and PM peak hour trips. So effectively, I think our conclusion with regard to the allowance of townhomes on smaller lots is no significant effect, or maybe even a slight decline in the effect during the critical AM and PM peak hours. The final fourth component that I looked at was the accessory dwelling unit, internal conversion, and cluster housing. These are all currently allowed under the code. The proposed code amendments would make it perhaps somewhat easier to develop these. And they represent such a small segment of the housing market. Again, I concluded that there would be no significant impact. So the overall conclusion is that the equitable housing program and the code amendments proposed in support of that would have a negligible effect on the transportation system when evaluated in comparison to the transportation system plan and all of the work we have done planning for the accommodating transportation needs of the community in 2035.
So, quick question for Pete. The TSP, the 8,000 houses is the projection from 2010 to 2035?
Yes.
Okay, it's now 8 years into that.
So where are we now?
Yeah, how are we trending? I mean, we added 280 houses or more in that 8 years?
Now that's, the 8,000 units over a 25-year period is about 300 per year, 350 per year.
Yeah, so our question is, to Pete, where are we now?
I don't know.
I think
where
we're
we are right
about,
now,
I think
but
we're
it's
about
close.
800.
Yeah.
So we'll
So we are,
add that to the list.
we are below the trend line.
And that's based on,
Permit data.
okay, so we'll expect to see, I'd like to talk about that a little further with some.
So are you talking about 800 homes?
8,000.
Unit,
8,000 units?
Yeah.
No, but you said 800.
I mean, it's gonna be 8,000.
John is
Right.
saying 800 to date.
Okay, to date. And that's not including all the new annexations that are coming up and all
We're
that
talking about
traffic.
Stuff that's built, not
built.
annexation, not
That's the-
land.
But I mean,
talking-
impacting the 2035
talking
data.
units, that's different.
I'm just talking about traffic in general, adding to, I mean, with all the annexations, Park Place, South End, Beaver Creek, all that, with transportation with 8,000 new units, I'm just,
Well, as you recall, we're supposed to be accepting more congestion, which we already are.
yeah, but how much congestion can we handle by 2035 if there's no changes?
I think our
That's my
community,
question,
our
John.
community will let us know that.
John, can you talk quickly about how the TSP anticipated annexation areas or concept plan areas?
Yeah, the majority of those 8,000 units, the substantial majority, would be in the areas that are within the UGB outside of the current city limits.
As of 2010.
As of 2010, yes. I may be able to get answers for you here in short order.
So it's always a question of mine, is transportation and
But
congestion.
we are definitely below, in terms of the approved subdivisions and the building permits and all of that, we are substantially below the trend line, below the straight line trend.
Who establishes the trend line, or how's that
Well,
developed?
we have the 2010 base year and the 2035 TSP year. So we have that 25-year period, and if we said it was going to be a straight line to accommodate those 8,000, you know, draw the line however you like.
Well, I think he's asking how he came up with 8,000, and that's from the Metro study and.
8,000 comes from the Metro study.
Yeah.
The Metro
Projections.
projections for the entire region divided by the 4 participating counties, the 20 whatever cities, and we have our own allocation for Oregon City to work with in terms of establishing our TSP, went down to the transportation analysis zones, and that's where it all comes out for 2035 and our TSP.
Interesting. Sadly, interesting.
Yeah, okay.
There's also a chart on page 23 of the staff report that illustrates the estimated units for the 3 concept plans, which is lower than the TSP estimate in terms of housing numbers, units. But for the worst case scenario analysis, you've got to go with this higher.
So this is the new staff report,
The recommended findings.
okay, because I
On page
have,
23.
the one I have is, let's see, is it dated here? No, it's,
Should be dated
I have
August
the-
20th.
I have the land use application, and on page 23 there's no chart, but that's a different document. Okay,
And then I can confirm the number of dwelling units for including 2010, which is 9 years, including
Yeah.
up to the last date of June of this year. We've had 1,242 single-family dwelling units issued, so not complete, but issued. And then 365 multifamily issued within that 9-year period.
And our trend should have been somewhere around 2,800.
They're all coming up in the next year too.
Yeah.
in terms of going back to the question about the areas inside the city limits and between the city limits and the UGB, the range would be probably in the 2,000 to 2,500 new dwelling units within the city limits, and the remaining, 5,500, 6,000 falling within the UGB, but outside the current city limits as of 2010.
Do you consider Redland Road outside the city limits, even though it's going to be impacted by all Park Place and the other
Oh, yeah,
new
I mean,
growth out there?
that's where we're getting a lot of the expected 6,000 new residences.
Because didn't I hear at one of our hearings before that Redland Road was going to be at a failing standard before 2035 because of the new road coming down? The new Holly Lane extension and all those 1,400 homes and the airport and I
Those
thought I
are,
heard that in a previous hearing. I'm sorry, John.
yeah, it was failing in its existing configuration.
it's not the number.
And no plans to improve it till
Well, the
2035.
TSP has plans to improve it.
This is just what's.
Didn't you all say it till
Right,
2035,
yeah,
there's no changes to
that's not
Redland
helping me. I need the.
and Holcomb area?
She was saying out
Oh,
loud.
At
I
one of
don't
the
think-
meeting,
I don't
Park
think
Place
so.
meetings? I thought I heard 2035, John, our director of Public
Lewis?
Works said that. Okay, just thought I'd ask, clarifying it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, John. So, staff is, we're going to recommend that the planning commission make any recommendations you want to the city commission that you feel are necessary to implement the proposed code amendments, and what that's going to look like is probably going to be substantially or slightly different than what is proposed right now based on input that we've talked about at the work session this evening. That said, we would ask you for a continuation to September 10th, which is our next regular planning commission public hearing, and look forward to further input.
And also, we'd like to enter into the record draft amendments dated today, as well as an associated matrix for that.
That's right.
the changes between last round and this round
I.e.
are
this.
color-coded in red, so you can easily tell both in the matrix as well as in the code amendments. So the question would be, what are the changes? So some of them we haven't talked about, but most of them we did talk about and either got direction from the planning commission to change something. So this is us implementing those changes, except for the things that we talked about in our work session earlier tonight, which we didn't feel that we had clear direction to do anything on. So that's left with the original proposal.
So is your recommendation that everything that we've received to date, we replace it with this?
Correct?
Okay.
Yeah, and we have as many meetings as you need, obviously, to get through this schedule. Now, at this point, we've gone through five work sessions
May.
with just you.
Yeah.
And,
This is very complicated.
yeah, it is complicated, and so we've gone through things a couple of times, and we're trying to narrow down what the issues that you want to talk about are. So if there's things that you'd like us to talk about at the next meeting, or something specifically, please let us know. We're writing down notes as you talk, both in the work session and now, but as of now, there's no more work sessions scheduled, just hearings, so.
I have one thing, we talked briefly about food carts.
Yes.
But,
I think we need to revisit.
and that's fine, but I also brought up the issue about mobile vendors, which is the language that's everywhere.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Peter and I discussed was the idea of having also a definition of mobile vendors. Being like the guy with the flags in his truck or whatever, the wood carvings that he rolls up and sets out. I mean, that's a mobile vendor, and he's gone in 3 hours when he sells out.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a very distinct difference between those two and what we as this, have heard, at least we in the city would like, and that's, we're okay with guys selling tacos, but not Texas flags. You know.
Those changes
Sorry,
are
Texas, nothing personal.
implemented.
The definitions are implemented, but I think probably we need more direction on the actual regulation,
The velvet
So-
rugs of Elvis.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
one thing to also note is thank you for those of you who've taken the time to come in and we meet with us sometimes more than once to go through these red line changes. A lot of those comments we heard are implemented. Some of the grammar stuff we've been hearing from planning commission too.
I just wanted to make sure that people knew that we're trying to pull those two apart.
Was there a main driving force for this? Was it the equitable housing and affordable housing? Was that the main driving force for getting a lot of this code changing going at this point? Or were there other major issues?
I think there's a lot of issues.
I know there's
So-
a lot, but I mean, was that the main driving force for it to?
Well, I mean, all things start with a comprehensive plan, which does have a lot of requirements for us to start to look at these types of issues, which shows up in the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. But the city commission had been hearing concerns that it's hard for people to find a place to live. They can't sell their house because they can't buy a new house in their neighborhood. So a lot of those concerns have generally broadly been brought up to the commission. So in their goal setting session, which goes between 2017 and 2019 biennium, we do goals and budget the same. They had identified a couple of goals behind me to look at this project. We received a $100,000 grant from Metro to look at equitable housing, which means all housing types for everybody, not just affordable. But in this case, we specifically focused a lot on that missing middle and worked with the community to see what type of housing options are feasible for us. So it's really, what does Oregon City want for our community, and what menu options do we want to have for property owners to implement or not, knowing that we're not looking at SDCs or anything like that. And so a large part of the discussion was talking about that. On the slide behind you, you can see there's this separation
see.
between equitable housing and the other things. So the other things are things that we've been seeing with our development code as we've been implementing that have been unclear, problematic, either places where we have too much discretion and we want direction, places where there's conflicts. Generally, the code amendments are long because we deleted a chapter and moved it from one space to another place, so we reorganized it a lot. One barrier to equitable housing, but really to public transparency of standards and things like that, is a complicated and clunky code. And so equitable housing focused a lot on housing, and then staff suggested other changes that would just make our code more clear, more transparent, remove some barriers that we've seen with applications over the years. So they kind of merged together in the last half of this project.
The reason I asked was not so much for me as for the public that is watching, because I know we've asked, why don't they show up to ask questions about these things? And I want to clarify for them. Some of the things that I felt that were missing from this was we've been, over the last couple of years, we've been round and round about lot averaging. It's in there, but it's never changed to what we agreed to. It went to, after 2 sessions with us, it went to the city commission. They threw it back and went back to the original, but we had voted on it here as a planning commission, as advisors to the city commission. And I still don't see any consideration of changing that a little bit. That's number one. And the second one was, we've been through all this annexation and we've got more coming up. And I don't see anything being addressed about tree cutting or making those who want to apply to our city follow some of our codes. Like Oswego, as Paul has mentioned, has something to say that you need to abide by some of our rules, like don't cut all the trees before you come in, because what good is the planning commission once the trees are gone? So I don't see anything of those issues that we've been discussing for the last 2 years and have been very controversial included in this. That's why I look at this, that's why I asked the question. It seems to be more towards equitable and a few other things, but nothing that's been really controversial with us in the city commission.
Yeah, you bring up 2 very good points. So for the tree concern, that is, you're right, it's not part of this project. We didn't talk about it a lot with the community. It perhaps is a topic which might need more citizen participation, involvement, discussions that are more targeted. So it wasn't part of this. We had blinders on to have some sideboards. I mean, I think this thing's like almost 400 pages. And so that wasn't part of it. It just wasn't
Even
part
though
of
that's
the
been
scope.
a major focus for us for the last 2 years, and we've discussed it out here at N with every time we talked about it. And by the time we
Yeah.
get around to doing codes again, that'll be 2 years out, and there'll be more property
Well,
brought
I'm
in.
not saying it's not important. It certainly is important. It just wasn't part of this project, or
Yeah.
there wasn't time to fit it into this scope of work. The other thing with the lot averaging, there were the code amendments, as you recall, and then it went to the city commission for final adoption, who did amend some
They reverted it back to
changes.
the way it was.
Well, no, there was the removal of the power lines from the way that we calculate lot averaging. And then the second part of that was that the city commission direct staff to include a discussion with our project advisory team about lot averaging, which did occur. And there are code amendments related to lot averaging in this,
not much of a
specifically.
change.
Well, actually, it's a huge change because the thing I think is really important or is helpful for lot averaging in this is that what the code amendments say and what the advisory team suggested is that we should take out all other housing options that aren't single family when we're averaging single family zones. So in other words, you can't get a density bonus for doing things like a corner duplex or things like that. You remove that and that lot size can't get smaller, but it's just narrowed to the single family. So I think it was a good response to this menu of housing options, and then looking at how you implement our existing standards now that we have a bigger menu. How do we calculate things like density and lot averaging differently? So there was some consensus from our advisory team on it.
Advisory team being that advisor from Portland, or I can't remember who.
It's the big list of people that Pete
Big
talked
list.
about, and I have to say thank you to anyone that's here on our advisory team. It has been years since I've seen an advisory team with so many new faces that I have never seen before. And it was really great. So a planning commission was represented on it. So a lot of the planning commission's opinions on the housing are baked into that equitable housing summary, but there's a little summary of what's on there now. And then we also had some online surveys. I think one of them hit 350 responses or something
First
like that. And then we also did a charrette, or like
Right.
an open house thing for a day too, and that we heard a lot more about homelessness than most other housing types, but
And I don't mean to question that committee or anything that you've done here. What I'm suggesting is the fact that we went through a big decision about a year and a half ago, and then we went to a work session with the city commission. They came back to us, we voted to approve something, and the city commission reversed that and except they left the power lines in, things like that. But we were looking at a bigger picture at the time. And I just didn't see in this, I thought this, if we were going to rewrite the code, this would be an appropriate time to really do something about lot averaging before it comes up to us again with huge lots or big slope lots that can't be used. And then all of a sudden, it's not power line, but it's going to be incorporated into that. So that's my concern, is that we've had to debate quite extensively some of these issues. And I just don't see them as being, when we've debated them and sent them to city commission, and I don't see a lot of work on the code. It's been more about equitable housing and things like that. I know there's a lot of other things in here, but that seems to be the emphasis when about most of this code changes, instead of some of the issues that really have bogged us down. You know what I'm saying?
this is not a complete rewrite of our code. You're correct.
And I just felt it was time to do that with this code, but because those were hot issues for us. Okay,
Okay, so commissioners, I've already have a list of 4 things that I found in my notes that we need to go back and revisit. So if you have other things, please make sure you let the staff know so that then they can let all of us know about what those items are. Okay, so just as a reminder, we are going to be timing. So when the red light flashes, please wrap it up and stop. And again, you have another bite at the apple. Multiple bites. We will not be this is probably one of the most complicated things that we've worked on since I've been on the commission, and I think I speak for my fellow commissioners that we're not taking this lightly. We're doing a lot of study and review, and it's really, really important. And I have a great deal of sympathy for our electeds, because they're going to have to, maybe they won't be going through it as in detail as we are, but hopefully we'll make some very good recommendations so that they won't have to. So I'm going to call up people 2 at a time. Nancy Ide and Carla Laws.
I'm not speaking up right now, I just don't have, or if I have any comments.
Okay. I'll keep your card though. Nancy Laws and Nikolai Person.
Good evening, planning commissioners. I've had a really long day, and I'm sure you have too. And
But you still have to introduce yourself.
I am,
Just give her a minute. Chill out.
but I want to thank you for your commitment and you are, Commissioner McGriff, you're absolutely right. This is a lot to go through. And my name is Nancy Ide. I'm speaking with the hat on this evening of the co-founder of the Homeless Solutions Coalition of Clackamas County. And this coalition has a vision to provide compassionate and respectful solutions to homelessness through community partnerships. Tonight, I'd like to speak specifically to just one area of your code amendments that you're considering. That's the area of transitional housing or shelters for our community members who are on the low or no income spectrum. These folks are people like you and I who are residents of Clackamas County, but due to their unfortunate circumstances cannot find stable housing in our city or county. Recently, a video was prepared by Clackamas County, and the county's housing and policy coordinator, his name's Vahid Brown. He spoke to dispel myths about who the homeless are in our region. And I'd like to read some of his comments. He says that I've worked with people in our community who haven't had stable housing for years, and they include every type of person from every walk of life. One of the big myths you hear, particularly on the West Coast, is called the magnet myth. It's the idea that the West Coast weather is nice, the people are friendly, the communities are welcoming, and there's an abundance of services. So the myth says that people come to Clackamas County from outside the region or state to be homeless here. The county did a survey 2 years ago on the Springwater Trail and got very solid data on homelessness in the county. And they were asked where they lived before they became homeless and how long they lived in Oregon. The overwhelming majority of them, 90%, were Oregonians for more than 10 years. I asked them where they were last housed before camping on the trail, and they would point to an apartment complex a few blocks from where we were. Not in every case, but 2/3 of them identified their last housing as the neighborhood in which they were currently camping. This is common across the West Coast. People lose their housing and stay in the community they know. That's where they have their networks, where they know the lay of the land, and it makes sense. Many people who were at working class incomes are experiencing homelessness in our community. Not everyone has a mental illness or a substance abuse disorder. Substance abuse is consistent across the overall population.
Red light is on.
I know I am speaking for the coalition.
I understand
And I'm
that.
wondering if I can have just a little longer. to make
Is that
the
something
point.
that you plan to submit in writing?
I can submit this.
Yeah, I did say very specifically, we were gonna try to keep everybody to 3 minutes, so. that-
Okay, I will speed that up.
Yeah.
So the words from Vahid Brown are very important, and I'd like to publicly thank him for that. I chose to use his words today because of his conclusions that the homeless people in our county are mostly local residents who come upon hard times. So as a city, in conclusion, it's our obligation not to be selective, but to provide housing opportunities to all income brackets in our community. The other proposed code amendments you are considering are addressing a variety of equitable housing options without a conditional use. But the missing piece is housing for our homeless and low-income residents. I encourage you to recommend codes that permit shelters in the MUC and MUD zone districts without a conditional use. I also encourage you to use specific federal language for housing to help applicants secure funding for building transitional housing. The phrase transitional shelter is actually old school, and the federal government is simply now saying shelter to define a variety of housing options for homeless and low-income persons. Once a person is housed, the county is doing its part by providing a variety of services to promote good health and well-being, and the college in town is ready and waiting with workforce training to help transition the homeless into sustainable independent living. So please help provide the missing piece in our Oregon City community by permitting shelters without a conditional use. And I thank you.
Thank you. That is a topic that we have talked about that needs further community conversation, not just a code amendment to squeeze something in. So it needs to have a community-wide discussion about that. And I think that it can be done without a lot of emotion and based on facts. But that community conversation, as far as I know, in Oregon City has not happened yet. So I thank you for your comments.
Okay,
And we have already stricken it just shelters now.
great. I haven't seen the new
It
minutes
just,
yet.
yeah.
Great.
Nikolai, thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. It's my Ramona.
Yep.
If the red little button is on, see on the bottom,
Yeah, it's on.
that little
Okay,
button?
it's on. It looks
Okay.
like the
Then you
time
should
is
be
going
good.
down, so
No, go for it.
I'll proceed. So my name's Nikolai Urson. I served as a member of the technical advisory team for the Equitable Housing Strategy. And I'm here on behalf of Northwest Housing Alternatives, which is one of the largest nonprofit housing organizations in the state. We own and operate roughly 2,000 units in 15 counties, with nearly a third of our portfolio based here in Clackamas County. You may recall I was here before the commission in March discussing Pleasant Avenue Veterans Project, or Veterans Housing, which was narrowly approved by this body in a last-minute 5-2 vote that was almost held up due to factors that may no longer be applicable in future projects if the package before you is passed into code. And I'm here today to say that that's a good thing, and here's why. The need for housing is pretty clear. The last point in time homeless count found that there were more than 2,000 people living in the streets, in shelters, in cars in Clackamas County. These include veterans, children, the disabled, and hardworking families that fell into difficult times due to the loss of work, illness, or other factors outside of their control. And some of those were described very eloquently by Nancy beside me. The cost of market rate housing is also now out of reach for many who call this community home, where the median home value is now around $410,000 and the average rent for a two-bedroom bedroom unit is over $1,200 per month. For a family earning minimum wage or several dollars an hour higher, this rent is far out of reach. This imbalance causes all sorts of problems, from family instability to greater traffic caused by folks who now must live far from their places of employment simply to keep a roof over their head. It's for these reasons, I believe, that this process got underway. So through this process and through our process of trying to get our project through the land use decision, found that one of the challenges an overly prescriptive code can get in the way of innovative development. Our project was designed to produce the most housing for the least cost. It was unadorned, but it was still elegant. The design reduced material waste, thereby reducing its carbon footprint. It was a model we hope to prove here and take to other areas of the state to replicate. But then we discussed our effort with planning staff and found that it couldn't be done. Articulation and modulation, ground floor, building height, maximum facade width, these were all adjusted at great cost of funding and time, and we still couldn't get our project through land use review without variances. Thankfully, this body approved that project, and I'm thrilled that the code revisions that are before you today are taking this into account and provide a more predictable path for those wishing to build needed housing for the community. Finally, I'd like to talk about parking for just a moment. In light of your conversations today, I'd just like to say that it's not free. Off-street parking costs roughly $10,000 per space to build, not taking into account circulation requirements, and structured parking can range between $25,000 to $50,000 depending on if it's underground